Hello guys and dolls. I've been having some thoughts recently about the year in a day, particularly since I've been reading about it in a couple of books that I've picked up. It's just kind of come along randomly in the subject matter, and it made me think a lot about the fact that I actually have never completed a year in a day and haven't really done any formal study with regard to kind of deciding what the beginner's topic should be, how I was going to get around to studying them, kind of any formulaic structure or regimen per se. So the year in a day thing has always really interested me, and I'm always really interested to hear from people who are in the middle of doing their year in a day, because I find that fascinating. I think it takes a lot of commitment and probably quite a lot of discipline to do the year in a day, because if you're anything like me, then you want to jump around. It's like a natural part of how you learn, and sometimes, unfortunately, jumping around from one thing to another can create this short circuit device in your head where you started studying one thing, but then something else grabbed your attention, and you're a bit like an intellectual magpie. You just basically go after what's shiny and new and looks good, and unfortunately, this can create a kind of vacuum in your knowledge where you know the beginning bit of everything or some bits of everything, but not the whole of any one particular animal, which is a problem which I've been trying to overcome through my 20s and has been like a long, hard road, unfortunately. So that might have been one good reason for me to do a year in a day, I suppose, because of that kind of lack of inner discipline. It's not that I don't thirst after knowledge, because I do. I just want to drink from like many different cups all at once, and this isn't really conducive to learning the whole of a subject with any degree of decency. The reason that I didn't do a year in a day study was because it's regarded largely as a Wiccan thing, and I never saw myself as falling under the Wiccan umbrella. However, I did come across writing that was to do with the year in a day study, because a lot of the books I picked up when I first became interested in the craft were books about Wicca. And I definitely have no regrets about that. Like, it gave me a really solid grounding in, a great deal of subjects surrounding witchcraft and stuff. So I'm really happy that it happened that way, but I never saw myself as being strictly Wiccan or adhering strictly to the Wiccan doctrine. So that's probably one part of why I didn't do it. And as I said, it's not really conducive to my, like, anti-academic personality, unfortunately. That's just how I am. I've got much more of an artistic brain, and I'm quite scatty, so I don't know if I really would have done it justice. When I first discovered that, the year in a day was supposed to be like the accepted time standard for going through your beginner's studies, because I think that's basically what the year in a day is. It's kind of the foundations, it's laying the foundations for your more intense study. So it's basically an overview of, your sabbats, your esbats, the circle casting, magical working, visualizations, meditations, the kind of mindset that you might need to get yourself into, the ritual mindset, tools, how the altar is set up, all that kind of jazz. And then from there, we can assume that the year in a day has enabled you to get to grips with most of the 101 stuff, and then move on to either more intense study of the overall pursuit of witchcraft, or more specialised study into one subject or another that took your fancy, kind of thing. I think that the year in a day itself as a time span is a little risky if we're talking about trying to quantify your beginner's learning into that 1 year and 1 day kind of time span. And I know that it is a typical time span from antiquity that had to do with like law and the perception that people had of when a certain deal could be set in stone. So, if it goes on for a year and a day, or if you both agree to it for a year and a day, then it's kind of like set in stone. At least this is what I've read. So I can understand where the year in a day thing came from, but I think if we're talking about really absorbing knowledge of witchcraft and really kind of getting to grips with what it means to you and what all of those foundation stones really are, it may take a lot longer than a year in a day. It might be something that goes on indefinitely, and I think that's probably another reason why the year in a day thing never appealed to me, because I was very on and off of exactly how far onto the path I wanted to go. I was confused about exactly what my path was supposed to look like. It changed quite a lot, and I kind of fell into and out of it as I became more or less comfortable with the premise. And when you're young, I think that's understandable, and when you're like enduring your adolescence, of course that kind of thing is obvious. That's going to happen. So the year in a day thing took, I think, too much commitment for a girl of the age that I was to actually start embarking on any kind of formulaic study process. But I think, yeah, the year in a day thing can be very misleading, and it might sort of put pressure on certain people to be done with their beginner's studies by the year in a day mark. For me, I feel like, it seems like quite a good time span, but I wonder why there needs to be a time span put on it at all. I kind of think it's one of those traditions that's more sort of endearing than it is practical, I guess you could say. And then there's the kind of two camps. One kind of set of people who might choose to do a year in a day study, or choose to do one that's already been planned out. So one that you either pay for and go for with a mentor, or one that you kind of see outlined in a book maybe, or on the internet. So you're kind of asking somebody to design the structure for you, and then you will follow that structure kind of doggedly and come out at the other end with something succinct that looks like a year in a day study. Or you can kind of plan your own, which I think is probably more appealing from my point of view, but I think at the same time, because of my lack of ability to kind of organise my brain in that way, and this is not something that I've given up on, like I'm trying, and I am noticing kind of what my downfalls are and where I need to improve on this stuff, and I am doing that slowly, but I'm also very good at understanding what my boundaries and limitations are. I'm good at being self-deprecating to an extent, to the extent where I can say, I'm not great at that, and I admit it. And I'm not great at kind of designing something like that would span over that stretch of time. I'd be too worried about having forgotten anything that would have been important and that kind of thing. So I think that's probably a good reason to follow the outline of somebody else's. And I do notice people are on year in a day courses, which they're paying a mentor to go through, and this seems to be kind of very nourishing and nurturing and cool. But by the same token, I do think that I would want a certain amount of autonomy over the process, which again would be problematic. So, and at this point on my journey, I'm not planning on doing year in a day study at all. I do think that it's something that's for beginners on the path, and even though I've kind of come back into the fold, I do not consider myself technically to be a beginner. However, I have kind of planned out in my book of mirrors, particularly over the last year, intensive periods of study on set subjects. So I am starting to specialize more, to have a look into different sacred texts, to have a look at certain things that interest me in the magical area. So, I am kind of structuring my study, and I think that's a really good thing. And I think the year in a day thing probably primes beginners to do that through the whole of their life on the path, which is fantastic. If you can begin with that strong foundation of kind of knowing what you want to study and really going with it and enjoying it, if you can begin from that year in a day study, which is your first experience of kind of scheduled study on anything to do with your path, then you're going to continue with those good habits, which I think is a really good thing, which is kind of a reason that I'm sad that I didn't do it, to be honest. And I'm not actually sure if it's that popular outside of the Wiccan umbrella. You'll have to correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure that it is mainly a widespread Wiccan thing, and that those witches who don't actually identify as Wiccan will probably not embark on a year in a day. But it does seem like a bloody good idea. In certain ways, it does seem like a really good idea to invest yourself in the in-depth study of something and lay the foundations before you start kind of doing magical workings and throwing yourself in head first. It seems like a good idea to have those keystones in place. So maybe it is something that other kinds of witches do, despite the fact that it kind of largely falls under that Wiccan umbrella. I don't know. But yeah, I do admire the commitment and the discipline that it does take. I do worry about people starting too young with their year in a day. I feel like the year in a day now has become, at least in my view, a way for solitary witches to justify their own initiation into the craft or something like that. So whereas with BTW you have this very kind of this hierarchy which kind of leads you through and lets you know when you're ready to go on to the next stage, and lets you know when you're ready for initiation, and there's kind of this structure to it. Because eclectic witches don't have that, I feel like in a sense the year in a day has become justification for self-initiation. Whereas I don't think it's necessary for all witches, and as I mentioned before, I do sometimes think a lot of witches probably need more than a year in a day to get to grips with the foundations of what the craft is all about and what the path is all about, but secondly to know if they're really ready for it, So I do think there's that pressure there. There's that pressure to do a year in a day when you may not feel that you need to, and when you may feel that initiation is kind of more important in an organic sense than gathering all of this information up that you may not be entirely sure that you even want to use in your practice. But then on the other hand, there might also be that pressure to be ready after a year in a day to initiate and become a witch, and I think that's kind of a danger too. So I suppose it's just the time limit that's put on it, I think, that I reckon might make it a bit difficult. I think it's probably useful for converts who come to the craft from other religions. That's something that I was thinking about and discussing with someone online the other day, actually. I think if you've come out of a set path that you kind of knew the ins and outs of, there was a structure there which you followed, it was very much a part of daily practice, and you're very, very used to, like, whatever it was, the scriptures or the rule book or whatever you want to call it, with regard to what religion you came out of, then you are already very used to having that foundation knowledge and having those keystones, and you probably begun your study of those keystones quite early in life with various different books or a teacher, or you went to Sunday school or whatever. So I think for converts from other religious paths who find themselves drawn to witchcraft, I think it's probably something that for them would make it much more of a smoother ride. And I think that's something that's great, because obviously if you have had a lot of that structure taken out from under you, and for a long time you were probably adhering to that structure when it didn't really mean that much to you spiritually, and you were still probably like looking around for that thing that did call you, or indeed knowing you were a witch for ages and not feeling able to say so, it might be difficult kind of coming into this frantic, chaotic, very new thing where you're not sure where to start, and you kind of don't feel that you have that strong foundation that you've had your whole life as a spiritual practitioner. So I think that's a good thing. I do feel like maybe the content with the year in a day may be a little bit restrictive. I've had a look at some year in a day outlines, like some suggestions of things that people should be focusing on during their year in a day, and people should definitely be studying during their year in a day. And a lot of it seems like, I don't know, there's a lot of stuff missed out that I would definitely put in there. Like, for example, I would definitely want to have a strong backing in other magical pathways aside from the one that I was personally choosing to walk. And I would definitely want a much stronger backing in the history of paganism overall, like all the different kinds of it and the different kinds of like polytheism, monism, monotheism, whatever, and dualism and monism in terms of thought about divinity. I think all this kind of thing, like this backing, this kind of philosophical and theological backing, was missing from the outlines that I saw. And I also feel like if you are going for a year in a day program that has been designed by somebody else for you to follow, then they are very much going to put emphasis on the things that have worked for them and the things that they place into their practice. So even though those things might be very useful and very important to consider, like for example the power of visualization in magical workings, or the importance of meditation and mindfulness, whatever it is, you may have to accept that some of the year in a day study might need a little bit of twisting to your advantage, dependent upon what you personally feel is working for you more. And I guess when you get to like the middle of your year in a day program, you'll be able to be kind of like more assertive about what's working for you and what you feel might need to be put more into the line of your perspective, and what might need to be kind of put into the background a little bit more, depending on what you personally feel is right for you. But yeah, I do feel that the year in a day can help young witches decide if that is the path for them. I just sometimes feel that witches might see it as a gateway towards self-initiation, or as a kind of justification for calling themselves a witch, or they may feel that they don't know enough until they've done that year in a day study. And although I think in a way the year in a day, the push of this year in a day idea does come from a place of responsibility and pure intention, I don't think it's necessary for every witch to do. I think that when we talk about an eclectic path, yes, we are still talking about a certain amount of structure, but how much are we talking about that structure being bended and being malleable and being flexible to the needs of the witch who indeed has chosen to be eclectic and solitary, or indeed Wiccan and solitary, because there are certain things about practice that she or he needs to kind of like mould into their own mold, so that it lends itself to their potential, or so it lends itself to their interests, you know. I do think like the year in a day study is useful in some ways, but also can be maybe a bit of a restrictive construct in other ways. But I'm interested in hearing what other people think about it, and as I said, it's something that I'm way beyond at this point. I do feel that culminatively I've had like more than a year and a day of practicing what I would consider to be the foundation stones of, you know, what witchcraft and magic is all about. But it came over a very long time period. It was very stretched out, and I kind of, as I explained in my Owning It video months ago now, I explained how the word witch and the notion of performing in a circle these rituals that I would consider to be magical in context and such was kind of like a rich, opulent fur coat that I like shrugged on and off. I really wasn't sure whether or not it was something I fully wanted to embrace and own and embark on, or whether it was just this part of my character that I couldn't really see falling into any kind of logical place or regular place, I guess you could say. So, you know, there has been a lot of organic passing into, but also kind of like restrictively pulling away from this whole idea of what witchcraft means to me. But overall, if I look at it culminatively, yeah, I've had a lot of experience with researching the basics, with understanding what the basic structures are, and I don't feel that I need to do the year in a day now coming back into things, because I feel like even though I'm coming back into things, technically I never really left things, you know. I just kind of cut off from my own emotional agenda with regard to what I was doing. It was like I still was, but I wasn't owning it. So I don't think that beginning to own it again at this point in my 20s means that I need to do the year in a day. But you know, there are some feelings of you know, a strange nostalgia for a life that wasn't mine, I guess, if you want to put it that way, for the year in a day, which I never did, which I kind of always had a bit of an interest in. But I do feel as well that there are some pitfalls there, so I wanted to discuss that as well. But yeah, two sides to the year in a day coin. Thanks for listening, guys. Blessed be.